Hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about for loops. It's our last lesson for this year. So let's get started. I opened an online Java compiler here, and this is what we're going to learn. We're going to learn about for loops. So as you can see, this is a comment, so it doesn't have any function. I can keep it like that. And here is our class, main class, public class main, which has the same name with the Java, with the file name. And inside the main class, here inside, we have got the main method, public static void main, string args, and inside the main method, we have printing. I'm going to delete this. And I'm going to start with a while loop to compare the two loops. We have learned about while and do while. So we're going to compare while loop with for loop. So in the previous lesson, we have learned some examples and the structure of while loop. We have learned about loops in the previous lesson. Generally, the three loop types, while, do while, and for loops. We learned that there were three loop types. And we learned the structure of while and do while. And we made some examples, some exercises about while and do while. So today we're going to learn about for loops, and we will compare for loop with while loop. Why we need for loop? Because we have already a type of loop. Why do we need another type of loop? So we're going to learn about this. Okay, so let me make the previous example that we did in the last lesson. We did an exercise that we printed hello on screen 3 times. So for this, first I'm going to need a counter. I define a variable called counter, and I want it to be initialized with 0. So counter will start with 0, and I will say while counter is smaller than 3. Remember, this was the condition to go or to stop. So if the condition is satisfied, if the condition is true, we're going to execute the code blocks. Which code blocks? Here, inside these curly brackets. If the condition here is true, we're going to execute the statements exactly after the condition. But if the condition is false, then we will say stop, and it will continue after these curly brackets, after line number 9. Or we can say it will skip these statements here between 7 and 9. Okay, so let's say here we've got system.out.println hello, and a space after it, and semicolon at the end. And after while loop, let's say we have another statement, which is with system.out.println done. So it will check if counter is smaller than 3. If it is correct, it will execute this statement here, only here. But if the condition is false, it will skip this, it will skip these statements here inside, and it will continue from this part. But it is important, the important thing is that it every time is going to repeat infinite. Why infinite? Because it's a loop. While, we say while, so that means when you finish this statement group here, you have to come back. check the condition. If it is true, enter the loop, and when you finish it, come back. If it is true, enter the loop. When you finish, come back. If it is true, enter the loop. When you finish, come back. Until when? Until this condition is false. So when this condition is false, that time, exactly at that time, skip the statements and continue from here. Okay, I think this was the summary of what we have learned at last lesson. So in this exercise, if we run it, this is going to continue forever. Why? Because we don't update counter variable. It's always 0. It starts from 0 and it never increases or decreases. So it will repeat forever. Why? Because counter is always going to be smaller than 3. It will repeat, come back, check it, true, come back, check it, true, come back, check it, true, 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 true. This will be repeated forever. If we run it, we can see that it will print hello all the time. Okay, you see hello, 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 and it continues forever. So all I have to do is to stop it or to close the program, because it's going to be like a virus. It will eat my CPU, so I don't want it. And to avoid this, what do I have to do? Well, simply I have to update the counter value, the counter variable. So I'm going to increase counter by 1 by saying counter plus equal 1. Or I can say, in other words, counter equals counter plus 1. Okay, so these two definitions are the same. Counter equals counter plus 1, or we can say more programmingly better way, counter plus equal 1. Okay, counter, yes, counter plus equal 1. So this will increase counter by 1 every time we repeat it, and so that it will not continue forever, but it will execute these statements only 3 times. Why? Because at first it starts with 0, then it will increase by 1. Secondly, we will have counter 1. It will print once, twice, and third, exactly after the third time, counter will have the value 3, so it will check here the condition that counter will not be smaller than 3, and at that time, exactly at that time, it will skip this part, and it will continue from here, system out println done, and it will print done. Let's see. Yeah, just like that. You can see we have here counter is 0, and here counter is 1, here counter is 2, and here finally we have done counter value is going to be 3, but 3, as you can see, because of the condition is not satisfied, it skips that part. Well, to examine this, we can make something different. We can enlarge this statement. Like what? Like we can write here, comma, counter value is, for counter value, colons, comma, counter. Okay. And finally here, I'm going to say here, system.out.println, and I will say again, counter value, comma, counter. And I will say out of while. Okay, let's run it. Now we can examine it better. I missed semicolon here. I'll run it again. Oh, there are some errors. What's the error? Let me check the error. Oh, yes, sorry. I have to use plus sign here. Remember to combine, to concatenate two strings. We have to use plus sign, not comma. Okay, also here. Okay, so here at first, it prints hello. Why? Because counter value is 0. And because of counter value is smaller than 3, it entered the value here and it printed hello, and also counter value here and the real value of counter, which is 0. And then in the second row here, what happens? Let's see. Before we enter the second row, in the first row, when in the first repetition, let's say, counter value is increased by 1, so counter is updated in the first repetition yet. But we check it here, counter is smaller than 3, so counter becomes 1 before we start the second row, and 1 is smaller than 3, that's correct. So we enter the loop and we print hello counter value 1, okay? Just like that, hello counter value. So it shows here exactly counter value is 1. And then counter value increases again by 1, counter becomes 2. And we come back here again, we see that it is true and we print hello counter value 2. And finally, at the third repetition, counter becomes 3, and when it comes here, it checks the condition which returns false, because counter is not smaller than 3, it is 3 now. So that's why, as you can see, it passes out of while. It skips the while statements here. And it comes here, out of while, counter value, and the value of counter, which is 3. And finally, done exactly after it. Okay, we had examined this in the previous lesson too. I hope this will be helpful, plus over the previous lessons. So now we're going to compare this while loop with for. Well, why do we need for loops? First of all, for loops is more organized than while. It is used more than while. Why? Because you don't have to update the counter variable inside the loop. Well, it has a more organized structure than while loops. Let's see a for structure. I'm going to use it here. Okay, I am starting it here for counter equals 0. Okay, so as you can see, my structure is so organized so that I don't define the counter before for loop, but inside, exactly inside for loop. So this is the first argument in for. Then I have another argument, counter is smaller than 3, and counter plus equal 1, and open close brackets. Okay, so what are the difference you can see? Let's also repeat this part here, Control C. Okay, Control V. All right, so what's the difference? You can see the difference. The first thing is that I don't define the counter variable before for loop, but I can define it inside as an argument of for loop, the first argument of for loop. But we always need a counter. In while or for, in every loop, we need a counter, but the name of the counter can be anything. I can make it like I instead of counter. That's completely up to me. Or I can make it A or X or index, whatever. I, which actually I is the shorthand for index, and that's why programmers mostly use I instead of counter, and it's also short. So I'm going to use it like that. Instead of counter, I'm going to use I. As I said, you can use anything you want because the name of the variable can be anything. There are some specific rules. Remember from previous lessons, like it cannot start with a digit. You can say I2, but you cannot say 2I. Okay, like I2 is a variable name, but 2I is not a variable name. Why? Because it starts with a digit. A variable name cannot start with a digit. So you have to be careful about those rules. But if you be careful about those rules, variable name can be anything. And another thing, there are 3 arguments in a for loop, so that's why it's organized. You finish the structure here inside this area with these arguments, and then inside these parentheses, you keep only the statements that are going to be repeated. You don't have to update the variable inside the statements, okay? So the second argument is the condition to enter the loop, okay? The second argument is the condition to enter the loop. Like what? Like we have I smaller than 3. This is the condition. What does it mean? It means if I is smaller than 3, well, enter the loop. Get in the loop again. Go. Remember from the video that we have learned, that we have watched in the previous hour? Go. Go means repeat the loop. Repeat the loop, repeat the loop. Whenever I is smaller than 3, repeat the loop. Whenever I is smaller than 3, continue, go, okay? But if I is not smaller than 3, then stop and what? And skip this part and continue from the next line, from 10. Or from the next statement, like it can be a statement also here, like you can, if you write system.out here, after this parenthesis here, then it's going to continue from here. But the thing is, it has to start exactly after this limit of for loop, okay? When I is not true. And the third argument, the last argument, is the update value of the counter or index. So I plus equal 1 means in every repetition, before you start to every repetition, no, not before you start. After you finish, at the end of the repetition, of each repetition, make these update changing, okay? Like for example, we start with I with 0, and we enter the loop because condition is true, I smaller than 3, but we don't execute this update yet, okay? We enter the loop, we say system out println, we execute this, and we're going to finish the loop, and we're going to come back here because, you know, it's the loop, and in every loop we have to come back. And when we come back, so we are at the end of the loop, so when we come back, we execute this statement, okay, when we come back. So at the end of every loop, we have to execute this statement, the third statement here, or argument. So I plus equal 1 means I is going to be increased by 1, and in every repetition, at the end of every repetition, this will be like that. So at the end of the first repetition, I will become 1. At the end of the second, I becomes 2. At the end of third repetition, I becomes 2, and at the end of the third repetition, I becomes 3, which when it comes back, it will check the condition here, and it will see the condition is going to be false, and it will continue from here, from the next statement. So it will be repeated 3 times in total also, just like while loop. So while loop also here starts with counter equals 0, and when we say counter smaller than 3, it repeats 3 times. Why? Because when you start from 0, 0, 1, 2, there are 3 repetitions, 3 iterations, and 3 is not counted, of course, because we have counter smaller than 3. And also here, it's the same. We start from 0, 0 is counted, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2. There are 3 iterations, but 3 is not counted. So when it's 3, it's going to continue from the next statement. So you can see the difference between for and while. As I said, it's more organized if you know. So while we need for loop, if you know how many times your repetition will be executed, well, it's better to use for loop, okay? Instead of while, programmers mostly use for loop because it's more structured, organized. So I'm going to delete this part, and we're going to examine this here. Okay, let me open an Excel document. Okay, at line, oh, let's me, anyway, at line number 6, line number 7, line number 8. Let's see what happens. So we have the index value I. I'm going to write the variables and all things that are going to be changed here, that can be changed here. And I'm going to write the output here. Is there any other thing? I think no. And here I'm going to write general output or all output. Okay, just like this. So I'm going to make this like that. Okay, and background should be black and color white, so that when we write something here. Okay. All right, so at line number 6, we have I value 0, and I value starts with 0. So I is 0 here. And what's the condition? Okay, let's add the condition too. We have forgot the condition. Condition. So what's the condition? Condition is I smaller than 3. Is it true? Yes, true. So what's going to happen if it is true? Well, we're going to execute line number 7. So we continue at line number 7. Line number 7 says system out println hello counter value plus I. But let's just make this part without, okay, only hello with a space. Okay. All right, so at line number 7, we have system out println hello. So the output here, I'm going to write hello with a space at the end. So I'm going to add this to the all output, hello. There's going to be a hello and a space. And because of it says println, I'm going to go to the next line here. So the cursor is on the next line, as you can see. And at line number 8, what do? We're going to come back because it's the repetition. It's a repetition. In a repetition statement, you always have to come back when you get at the end, okay? So we're going to go back to line 6. So when we go back to line 6, at line number 8, remember we said at the end of every repetition, you have to update the counter or the index value, and the update value is in here, the third statement. So how do we update it? I plus equal 1 means that I will be increased by 1 and I will become 1, just like that. So at line number 6, we're going to check from now on, we don't have to initialize this I equals 0 will not be repeated anymore. This I equals 0 is executed only at the first repetition, only at the first repetition. Here at line number 6, at first I starts with 0, and then this statement, the first statement, is not executed anymore. But instead, we are going to check the condition at every repetition, and at the every repetition, at the end of every repetition, we're going to update the variable, the counter, with the third statement. Okay. So at line number 6, we're going to check if the condition is true. So I smaller than 3, which 1 smaller than 3 is true, and that's why we're going to enter the loop. At line number 7, we're going to enter the loop because of the condition is true, and at line number 7, we're going to print another hello and a space after it. So at all output, we're going to add another hello, a space, and go to the next statement. Okay, so we have the second hello here. And then line number 8, we continue with line number 8. And before we go back to line number 6, what we're going to do, we're going to update I value, increase it by 1 because of here. Remember, I plus equal 1, so I will be 2. And we come back to line 6. And at line number 6, we're going to check I equal 3, if it is correct or not. 2 is smaller than 3, 2 is the value of I, so it's smaller than 3. And that's why the value is going to be, the condition is going to be true. And we will enter the loop because the condition is true. With line number 7, we will enter the loop. And line number 7, print another hello, and a space again. So we're going to add this third hello and a space and go to the next line. And finally, we have here line number 8. And before we go back to line number 6, we're going to increase I again here at the end of the repetition. We're at the end of the repetition. So we increase I by 1 and I becomes 3. And now we're going to come back to line number 6 again because the repetition continues forever, but it is going to be finished when the condition is false. And exactly right now, we are going to check the condition. I is 3, I has the value 3, and 3 is smaller than 3. Is this correct? No, this is false. And that's why we're not going to enter the loop, and we're going to skip line number 7 and line number 8 because they both are statements of for loop. And we're going to continue with line number 9. As you can see, we skip from 6 to line 9. Okay, so what if we had any other statements here instead of one statement, only one statement? What if we had more than one statements here? Well, it was going to skip all those statements, and it was going to continue with line number 13, for example. Okay, but for now we have only one statement, and that's why I wrote line 9, because line 9 is exactly after exactly the next statement after fourth statement. And at line number 9, what happens? We have system out println done, which means print done to the screen. So I'm going to print done here, a space, no space, but next statement. You see, we have println, so next statement. And I'm going to add this done. Just write them here. So we are already at the next statement because of the previous println. So we're going to write done here and go to the next statement because we have println again. And we're going to be done with this output. And after line number 9, what do we have? We're going to continue because there's no repetition or selection. So it's a sequence. Line 10. Line 10 is the end of main method, as you can see. It's the end of main method here. So we will just continue. And line 11, we'll continue with line 11. And line 11 is the end of class, main class. So we're going to close the main class and we will finish the program. So it's going to show us 3 hellos and a done. Let's see. Well, we have some problems. What is the problem? The problem is that we didn't define the type of I. So I'm going to define the type of I here by using int. Remember, in while loop, what did we do? We said int counter equal 0. So sorry about that. Counter is the variable. So here also I is a variable. That's why we have to, of course, absolutely we have to define its variable. We can define the variable type inside for statement, just like that. We don't need counter. And now let's see. And as you can see, it prints hello 3 times and done exactly after it. And so when we define I for the first time here, you see, this is like a statement, okay? This is a statement. So the program Java is going to meet I from now on so that we don't have to initialize I again. So when we write I in the second statement, Java will understand that this I is the same with this I. It's this I, okay? So it meets the I here, okay? So that we have to define I at first with the int, with the type, with the integer type, or whatever, like double, whatever, but generally it's int. Okay, so this was the first exercise. We printed 3 hellos and 1 done. Now let's print the counter values or the I values. So I'm going to write I and I will say plus a space after it. And I will change this to print, not println. Okay, so let's see what is going to happen in here. Okay, so we started line number 6. We have I starts with 0, as you know. And the condition is I smaller than 3. Is that true? Yes, of course, I is smaller than 3, so true. And that's why we enter the loop. And what do we have in the loop? Line number 7. We continue with line number 7. I is already 0, condition was true. We have output, okay, system out print I plus space. So the value of I is going to be printed. And what's the value of I? It is 0. And a space after it. So I'm going to delete this here, all output. We have 0 and a space in all output. Then we will continue with line number 8. And line number 8 is the end of the loop, is the end of the first repetition. We are at the first repetition. So in the first repetition, at the end of the first repetition, what do we have to do? We have to update the value here. So the value is going to be the value of the counter variable is going to be 1 because it was 0. 0 plus 1 is 1. And the condition, so yes, we come back to line number 6, line 6. And again, we're not going to initialize I again. We initialize I only at the first repetition, okay? Only when we start to for loop. But in other repetitions, we never initialize I again because Java already meets this I, okay? We don't have to. So this is the second repetition and we come back at line number 6 and we check the condition. Condition was I smaller than 3. Is it true? I is 1. and 1 is smaller than 3, so it is true. And then what's going to happen? We enter the loop. Go means, this means go. The condition is true, that means go. So we enter the loop at line number 7. And what do we have at line number 7? We have system out print I plus space. So what was the value of I? 1 and a space. 1 and a space. So we're going to add it here. We had 0 and a space. Let's add it again. Now we're going to have 1 and a space. Okay. Maybe we could add a comma here so that it was going to add a comma after it. Okay, so we would have here 0, comma, space, and 1, comma, space. Okay, so let's add it also here, 0, comma, space, 0, comma, space. I have to change it here. Okay, well, let's change this on. Okay, 0, comma, space here, and 1, comma, space here. Okay, we add them to the output here, like that. And then at line number 8, what do? We update the value, we update the counter value. How do we update it? We increase it by 1 because it says I plus equal 1. And I becomes 2. It was 1, it becomes 2 here. So after it becomes 2, we come back to line number 6. Line number 6. And what do we do at line number 6? We check the condition, I smaller than 3. Is it true? Yes, it is true, because I smaller than 3 means 2 smaller than 3, and that is true. 2 is smaller than 3. And so what does it mean? It means enter the loop. We can enter the loop because the condition is true. And we continue with line number 7. And what do we have at line number 7? We have system out print I plus, comma, space. So what's the value of I? It is 2. And then we have comma and a space. So comma, space is going to be added to the output. So we add 2, comma, and a space. And then what do we have? We continue with line number 8. And at line number 8, what do? We are at the end of the repetition again. We update the value of I. So the value of I was 2, it becomes 3. We increase it by 1. And now we come back to the line number 6, because we were at the end of the repetition, we come back to the beginning of the repetition. And when we, at line number 6, what do? We check the condition. What was the condition? I smaller than 3. Is it true? No, because I is already 3, so 3 is not smaller than 3. And that will return false. And that's why we're not going to enter the loop. We're going to skip this part from here up to here, and we're going to continue with line number 9 exactly. So we write here line 9. And what do we have at line 9? We have system out println done. So we're going to write here done. We're going to add a done here and go to the next line. That's all. So it's going to show this on the screen, 0, 1, 2, done, and next statement. Let's see. Exactly like that. 0, 1, 2, done. Okay. I want to make one more exercise. Let's make the multiplication table, one column of the multiplication table. So we need to start from 1, and let's say up to 10. Not okay, yes, up to 10, but includes 10, smaller than or equal to 10. And we say I plus equal 1. So this repetition, this will be repeated, these statements will be repeated starting from 1 up to 10, including 10, So I want to show the first column of multiplication table, okay? And that's why I will add here in the print what I'm going to add. I will add 1 times and space, and I will say plus I, another plus. So this is going to be, for the first repetition, is going to be 1 times 1, and I will say equal, and I will add another plus I times 1. Okay, so maybe we can make it not the first, but the third column. Okay, let's make it the third column. So I will say I times 3. So 3 times 1 equals 3, 1 times 3, or 3 times 1. Maybe we can make it 3 times I to be more clear. Okay, so the first repetition will show 3 times 1 equals 3, because 3 times 1 is 3. And in the second repetition, I will become 2, and it will say 3 times 2 equals 3 times 2, which is 6. Then in the third repetition, it will say 3 times 3 equals 9, because 3 times 3 is 9. And finally, it's going to print done. But here I have to make it println, because I want it to be shown in a column, not in the same row. Let's see. And it will continue up to 10, exactly like that. So here is the result. 3 times 1, 3, 3 times 2, 6, 3 times 3, 9, and so on. So you can enlarge the examples. So you can say, instead of 10, you can make it 100. So it's going to find the multiplication of all numbers with 3, starting from 1 up to 100, just like that. Okay, so that was all for today and for the year, actually, because we finished the year. I hope you enjoyed informatics lesson this year. I hope you learned some useful things. I wish you a nice holiday with your family, and a healthy holiday, most important, maybe. And thank you for watching. I want to say finally goodbye.